Hello, church. Today we're going to be in Luke 8. One day, he got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, "Let us go across the other side of the lake." So they set out. And as they sailed, he fell asleep. And a windstorm came down on the lake, and they were filling with water, and were in danger. And they went and woke him, saying, "Master, Master, we are perishing." And he awoke and rebuked the wind and the raging waves, and they ceased. And there was a calm. And he said to them, "Where is your faith?" And they were afraid, and they marveled, saying to one another, "Who then is this, that he commands even winds and water, and they obey him?"
Here's a really simple question, but it can be a profound question. A simple question that we can use in the lives of each other, and it's simply this: what is God teaching you lately? And so if you leave here today or this week and you want to turn to another believer and just ask that question, what's God been teaching you? It can be so helpful. It can be so encouraging to just hear from others and what God's been teaching them. And so I wanted to set this Sunday up like this. I would love to share with you what God's been teaching me this year. And here's the funny thing. You guys have been learning it alongside me. I hope maybe you might carry a few things with you. You might be able to reflect on your year and go, yeah, these are some of the things that I've walked away with. Because as we studied Philippians in the spring semester and Nehemiah in the fall semester, as I look back at the year and was thinking about what God has taught me, it's just so much wrapped up in those series we did. And so you might hear me repeat a few things from what we've done this year and pull those out and just say, man, that I couldn't let go of this. So what has God been teaching me this year? Well, I'll just give you the answer right away. What God's been teaching me this year is how to survive a storm. That's why we're in Luke chapter 8. That's why I was drawn to this passage. A lot of you guys know my life. You know very intimately just what the last year has looked like. I know your life well for many of you. And for this past year, I would just say it's been a storm. It's been a storm. There's been so much that's happened. I don't know if you've ever been in a really bad storm before. I'm sure you have. I'm sure you've been in one of those thunderstorms where it's just lightning and thunder all around you, and you're like, whoa, this is crazy. For our family, this was years back. The kids were small. We were sitting in our dining room. It was a summer day, and the thunderstorms are just going crazy. And what seemed like out of nowhere, even though there was lightning and thunder all around us, I never expected it to be that close. If you've ever been close to a lightning strike, that's what happened to us. Just a few feet from where we were sitting in our dining room, we had this huge tree, and just boom, the lightning struck the tree, and it was just like this huge flash of light, and then the thunder just booming at the same time. I thought a bomb had exploded, even though we were in the middle of a thunderstorm. I'm like, we're getting bombed, and I'm like, trying to get the kids onto the table, take cover. It was that kind of moment, and it was scary. I mean, to have that kind of just fierce weather come at you like that. I'm sure people have sat through worse storms, but in that moment, it was intense. There's another storm that I think about that I experienced. I made it out of this one alive too, thankfully, as you can tell. We were on a trip to Puerto Rico, and my family, I think I was in college, and we went on a snorkeling side quest. And we went out probably, I don't know, several miles away from the island. And we did our thing, and it was fun, it was good. But the part that was most memorable was us returning. I think they fed us some sandwiches or something like that, and we were returning back from the snorkeling trip back to the island. And as we made our way back, I don't think the captain was expecting the kind of storm that started to roll up on the water. And we were in a small boat. It really wasn't that big. There were others that were with us, and that boat just started going up and down and up and down, and I'm like, oh boy, I hope we make it back. And then what comes next after everybody's had their sandwiches and we're going up and down, people started going to the side of the boat, and it was just a disaster zone, just stuff flying everywhere, people throwing up and things in the air. And I have the claim to fame that I never threw up. I made it through the whole trip while literally everyone else in the boat lost it that day. But we made it out. We made it alive. But that storm was pretty scary. In this story, we have Jesus and his disciples in a boat facing a storm. And I imagine it's pretty scary because the disciples, who are very experienced on the water, many of the disciples were fishermen. They come to Jesus. Jesus, don't you know what's happening? Jesus is asleep in the middle of a storm where these experienced fishermen think they're going to die. So bad storm, somehow Jesus is sleeping through it. And they're like, Jesus, we're going to die. That's the kind of storm that Jesus faced. And I'm obviously using that storm as kind of a metaphor for our life. We know that we will have storms in life. And that's what it's felt like for me. Again, a lot of you guys know this, but I started reflecting on the year. I think this is good too. I'd encourage all of you to do this. To reflect back on the year, to think, what has God taught me? What have I had to walk through? What are the things, where are the places maybe I've seen God show up? And for me, I started reflecting just on this year where I lost a family member. My car was in a hit and run. We've had deep and hard family struggles. I had false accusations brought against me. So many things that I planned a certain way didn't go the way I planned. I've experienced loneliness at times and humiliation. We had unexpected house repairs this year. We had medical bills this year that kind of mounted up. And I don't know, I've told a few of you, but last week we were on our family trip and we were coming back home. And we were on the interstate in South Carolina, and it was insane. I've never been in a moment where just like a car stopped on the interstate in front of us, and it looked like we were just all about to just smash into each other, and there was going to be cars rolling and fire. It felt like I was in a movie, but somehow the Lord protected us, and but a car slammed into the back of us and rear-ended us, and it was like, okay, here we go. Let's add it to the list. One more thing. And I know that some of you this year has also felt like a storm. I know some of you, you've walked through really, really hard storms in your life. For some of you, you're like, it hadn't been that bad, but you will walk through storms. And when we walk through storms, here's what I'd like to offer to you today. Some things that God's taught me about how to survive when the storms come. When I look at these verses in Luke chapter 8, I'm going to give you 4 ways that I felt like I could walk out of this year and say, this is where God has taught me of how to survive a storm. And the first one is this, that we need to expect the storm. So I talked about this in the story of Nehemiah, when we talked about Nehemiah's opposition, when he has Tobiah and Sanballat coming out against him, and it's like, those guys are trying to keep him from building the wall. And then internal battles go on there in Jerusalem with the people. All through Nehemiah's story, it's opposition, opposition, opposition. And you might have heard me use this illustration where this is when I watched the Superman movie that came out this year, and thinking about how in that movie, that latest Superman movie, that Superman looked like he was down and out the entire movie. Then at the very end, he pulls it through. And for a while there, I was like, maybe they're going to kill Superman off in this movie. But at the very end, he pulls it through. And I was thinking, if you reverse that, and the whole movie, Superman just boom, boom, he just took everybody out. There was no battles. There was no struggle. You would have walked out and you would have said that was a terrible movie. That in the struggle, we find that like there's something that happens that's good and needed. And so we know that in every great story, there's struggle. And then to see victory come out of the struggle, that's where it gets good. And so all that to say, in 1 Peter, we're reminded, dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. Right? When we in the middle of a storm and a fiery ordeal and something where we're really struggling, so often we're like, why are we going through this? I don't understand. And we're literally surprised by it. But Peter tells us, don't be surprised when they come. In fact, Jesus said it first. When Jesus said, in this world you will have, do you remember what he said? In this world you will have trouble. Take heart, I have overcome the world. And so Jesus tells us, you're going to face trouble. Peter tells us, you're going to have fiery ordeals. And so when the storm comes, we shouldn't be surprised. We shouldn't just go, what is happening to my life? Because we do have this funny thing we do in Christian culture where we're like, we feel like God has asked us to go and do something. We're trying to be obedient. And there we go. We're off and we're running. And then just like 2 seconds in, we face something difficult. And we start to second guess. We're like, oh, I don't know. Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Maybe it shouldn't be this hard if God really wanted me to do this. And then maybe even we have friends who come by and they're like Job's friends. And they say like, hey, are you sure you heard from God on this? I don't know. Like, it seems like this has been a little too hard. Maybe you've missed God on this. And we forget that in this story, look back at verse 22 with me. If you look back at verse 22 in Luke 8, it says, one day he got into the boat, meaning Jesus. Jesus got into the boat with his disciples, and he said, let us go across to the other side of the lake. Jesus took them into the storm. And so we should expect the storm. We shouldn't be surprised by the storm. I mean, that tells us two important truths, that when we question whether or not, when a storm pops up, we're like, are we supposed to be here? Jesus took his disciples into the storm. The storm doesn't mean we aren't where Jesus wants us to be. It also doesn't mean that Jesus isn't there with us. That's what we learned right away. So that's the first step in surviving the storm, I think, is just to expect the storm. As believers, we don't need to be surprised. As 5 Points Church, we don't need to be surprised if this next year we face some kind of battle that's difficult. And we might look around, God, are you in this? Maybe we missed you, God. And there is always the chance that we've brought something on ourselves. It's our own foolish consequence. There's always a chance that we have missed God. But listen, more often than not, it's the world we live in that's broken. It's the world we live in where Satan works. In fact, in these verses, when Jesus calms the wind and the waves, Luke and Mark both use this word rebuke. He says he rebukes the wind and the waves. I thought that was interesting because in the Gospels, the word rebuke is most often used to cast out evil spirits. And it's kind of like the evil one has sent this bad storm. And with the bad storm, Jesus is saying, hey, this is not supposed to be how you were created to be, wind and waves. And he rebukes them. So one, don't be surprised by the storm. And two, here's the next step. If you want to survive the storm, is notice where your faith is thin. And I want to sit on this for just a little bit. I'll set it up with an illustration. Think about a newlywed couple, and they went on a trip. And on this trip, the husband, here's what we do, guys. He leans up to the taxi cab driver. And on this trip, they give their destination to a taxi cab driver after jumping in the car, and the husband leans up and he says, hey, I know the best route. And he starts to give advice to the driver. And then as they're taking off, he's like, whoa, I don't know if that's a good idea to go that way. Because the husband's been here once before, one time, so he's an expert. And then as they're in traffic, the husband again is like, hey, whoa, we're about to hit, just be careful. Do you know what you're doing? That kind of thing. And the wife breaks in at some point to kind of break the tension, and she's like, hey, where are you from? And the driver says, I'm from here. This is my hometown. Oh, wow. Well, how long have you been doing this? And the driver answers back, well, actually a really, really long time. My dad was a cab driver, and in this city, it's really hard to get a license to be a cab driver. And so I would ride with him, and I knew his routes, and I knew the city. And then when I grew up, he passed it down through his business that I could be a cab driver. And so I have that license. And so now I've been driving for 30 years, and I don't even need a map in this city. Husband sits back, okay, I feel pretty dumb. What was I doing offering advice? I promise that would never be me in real life, and I know that would never be you. But isn't it funny, like how we think, I'm sure you found yourself in those kind of moments where like you think you have expert advice and you go to the expert and you try to give your advice, and maybe you realize later, well, that's what the disciples are doing here. When they go to Jesus, they say, Jesus, look, we're about to die. And Jesus is like, hey guys, I created the wind and the waves. I'm the expert here. You're coming to me like you're the expert. No, yeah, you've been on the water a lot, but listen, I know the water. I know the waves. I have charge over the wind and the waves. And so I want you to think about this. When Jesus says to them, after they say, hey, we're going to die, Jesus, and he calms the storm, he asks this question. He says, where is your faith? Where's your faith? And that is a convicting question. When we lack faith, it's often full out disbelief. At times, it can be just where our faith is a little thin. We're just, oh God, I want to believe, but I don't know if I can. And he asks that question, where's your faith? And it's a very important question for us. Hebrews 11 tells us that without faith, you cannot please God. Faith is necessary for us in our walk with Jesus to trust him. Faith is the evidence of what is not seen. It is us placing our hope in what is not seen. We cannot see God, but yet we trust him. We believe him. And so for us in our relationship with the Lord, faith is absolutely necessary. And there's going to be moments, especially in the storm, where we're going to probably lack faith. And so as I reflected on the year this year, I know as I've gone through a storm, that one of the things God has wanted to do is point out areas in my life where I have had disbelief, where I have not had faith, right? This is the part I don't like to talk about. I don't want to get this vulnerable. But over the course of the year, specifically how I've been helped is, a lot of you know this, I meet with a spiritual director on a regular basis. And as I sit down with the spiritual director, we talk through life and what's going on, and oftentimes these are the kind of things that come up where I'm talking about, okay, here's what's happening in life, here's how I've been responding and thinking about this, and more times than not this year, what's come out the most is where I have not had faith, where I have not trusted. Okay, so I'm an Enneagram 3. Are there any other 3s in here? Okay, don't raise your hand. You don't want to raise your hand if you're a 3. 3s are achievers. 3s are driven. We like to go after things and make things happen. And put it this way, if I was on the boat with Jesus and the disciples in this story, here's what me as a 3 would have done. I've been like, where's the steering wheel? I don't think that's what it's called, but give me the steering wheel. I'm going to take this ship, and we're going to get through this storm, people. Suck it up. And we're going to make it through the storm. When we get to the other side, I'm going to go find Jesus. In fact, he's probably still sleeping. I'm going to be like, Jesus, I don't know if you saw, but I made it through that storm. I want you to know that I did that. Yep. So, as an achiever, I am constantly thinking about accomplishing, right? And so, as you go through the storm keeps you from accomplishing. The storm keeps you from achieving, oftentimes. And I'm talking with my spiritual director, and he's like pulling some of those pieces out. And I started to realize that I didn't really believe that if I followed Jesus in the way that he prescribes for us, I didn't believe that it would work. Right? Jesus says, I want you to be so generous. If you get into Jesus' teachings about what it means to be truly generous, we all have a lot of work to do. And I think Jesus, if I were to live like that, I don't think it would work. And when Jesus calls us to rest as a 3, I'm like, whoa, I don't want to rest right now, because if I rest right now, things will fall apart, right? Those are the kind of lies that I end up believing. When Jesus shows us what a relationship with the Father looks like by being completely dependent on him, I'm like, well, does that work? Because don't I need to go and do something first, and then I can go and be dependent on God? And Jesus is like, no, that's not how it works. And I'm like, I just don't know. And so I have an area of disbelief. I have an area where my faith is thin there. And I'm bringing that out. I'm figuring that out. And as I'm speaking with my spiritual director, he takes me here to Luke chapter 8. We're looking at this text, and he says, I want you to think about what the disciples do in this story. Think about how the disciples are reacting to the storm and how they interact with Jesus. In this story, and it took me a second, I'm like, what do you mean? I don't know where you're getting at. Think about when the disciples went and woke Jesus up. What were they doing? I'm still not tracking. I'm like, I don't know. What were they doing? I guess they were scared. They were fearful. Yeah. But what are they trying to do? Well, they're trying to put Jesus on their agenda. In that moment, think about it. They are literally saying, Jesus, you don't know what's going on. We do. And we need you to kind of jump in with us and like get on with it. And it was the disciples trying to lead Jesus. And so we started talking through that idea. Again, this is me. And I think for you asked the question, like, is there a place where you lack faith? For me, it was me going back to, oh yeah, more times than not, I'm trying to lead Jesus, right? More times than not, well, I hope it's not more times than not, but you get what I'm saying. I have bought into a lie that I think that I'm enough, that apart from God, that I can be enough. And in this story, I find that to lead Jesus and try to put him on my agenda, he's going to fire back at me. Where is your faith? So then as I'm talking to my spiritual director, he said, okay, I want you to read Psalm 23. What's Psalm 23 say? Okay, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. Maybe you know the next line. He leads me beside still waters. He said, put those stories next to each other, okay? In one story, the disciples are trying to lead Jesus. And when you think about what Psalm 23 is saying, is the way to still waters is when you allow Jesus to lead you. Oh, yeah. Man, I have a hard time with that. So is Jesus leading you, or are you trying to lead Jesus? You know, there's so many times where we're like, okay, God, I need you to get on my agenda. Come over here. Get over with me, and here's where we're going. This is what I want to see happen. And the way to life, the way to just the good life with Jesus is when you allow him to lead you, when you allow him to bring you along beside still waters, and to be at peace and calm, even in a world that's just chaotic and crazy. So that leads us to number 3. Here's the third step. If you want to survive the storm, you need to trust the one who's in charge. Trust the one who's in charge. I kind of skipped over verse 24 a little too quickly because it really is amazing. This is a miraculous story. We have to believe in miracles in order to accept this story. The fact that Jesus has power over the wind and the waves, we're taking a leap there. Do we believe that Jesus, he stood up, and in Mark's gospel, he records 3 words. He says, peace be still. And it was still. The waves stopped, the wind stopped. And for the disciples, they record this as fact. Luke is a historian who's writing this, and he's saying, this is what happened. This isn't like a made-up metaphor. He's saying this is what happened, that there's a guy who has charge over the universe and nature. And the disciples, after he gets done rebuking the wind and the waves, they're no longer fearful of the wind and the waves. What's it say? They're fearful of Jesus. Who then is this that he commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him? So with that in mind, with the fact that Jesus has command over winds and waves and storms, doesn't it make sense for us to trust him? Stop trusting in ourselves. Stop looking at ourselves or someone else to carry us or to get us through, and to look at Jesus and to say, Jesus, you're the one with real authority. You're the one in charge. Like, I need to trust you. I hope you're saying, of course it does. But also, I know in real life that it's easy for me to stand up here and say, hey, trust Jesus, trust Jesus, trust Jesus. And it's another when we're in our everyday life to actually, I'm going to trust Jesus today. What does that look like? I don't know what that looks like. It just got chaotic, and I'm kind of panicking. I don't know if this is the time. Can I trust Jesus? You're just like, oh, I don't know. Okay, that's just me. Thanks. When you're in the middle of a storm, you feel like panicking. You don't feel like trusting. That's what I'm saying. And so how do we do that? I want to go back to Philippians, right? We were studying through Philippians, and it was just more powerful than it's ever been when we went through Philippians 4, 6 through 8, where Paul says, do not be anxious in anything. Do not be anxious in anything. Then he says, but in everything, with prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God that surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. It's this beautiful passage that helps us understand that even when we feel like panicking, we can actually find peace. And not just any kind of peace, but a peace that surpasses all understanding. The kind of peace that when we're in the middle of a storm and people look in at our lives, they're like, how can you have peace right now? And you say, I don't know, but God has given it to me because of the peace that surpasses all understanding. And the way to get to that peace, Philippians tells us, is through prayer. Through prayer. It says, but in everything, by prayer and petition, let your requests be made known to God. That's what we talked about when we were in Philippians. And at some point in that series, and I want to bring this up again, I gave a very practical way we could do that. And that was through an older prayer called the welcoming prayer. Maybe you remember me sharing this before. And the idea is this: when we're going through a storm and like everything is just crashing in around us, our instinct will be to just get out of there or get away or whatever. And here is probably a more appropriate way to work through a storm, how to survive the storm. It is for you to say, okay, God, I'm in a storm right now. I feel it. I'm not denying it. I'm not saying, well, it's not that bad, because it is bad. Okay, I'm fully acknowledging it. And then, Lord, I'm welcoming you into it. And when you welcome him into it, here's just a 2-line prayer that you can pray. I'm going to put this on the screen. It says this: I let go of my desire for security and survival, esteem and affection, power and control. I let go of my desire to change my situation. And let me be clear, this kind of prayer makes no sense in our world apart from Jesus. For us to say that, like, hey, when it comes to security, survival, esteem, affection, power, control, even trying to change my situation, like, I am letting go of those things, like that doesn't work in our world. But this is the kind of life that Jesus calls us to. And when you sit in those moments and you actually pray this prayer and you actually mean it where you're at, it's amazing how God meets you there. So this has become a practical prayer for me as I'm sitting in a moment that is just, again, as a 3, there's so many times in my life where I feel like I've been able to get the better of my situation, but until you get to a place where you literally can't do anything about your situation and you say to God, I let go of that desire, Jesus meets you there. He meets you there because he's the one who ultimately can do anything with any place and any time where you find yourselves. The Bible tells us a very counterintuitive truth that in the middle of the storm, in the middle of the place where we are most weak, Jesus can be most strong. Here's the 4th thing that this helps us get there next. 4th thing is remember that Jesus is near. Here's like the biggest point I could leave you with today. That in the storm, we think it sure would be great if the storm was over. And what God shows us continually, what Jesus has shown us continually is not that it's best for the storm to go, but for us to sink our minds and hearts into the fact that he is near, that he is with us. So I'll say it like this: true peace is not found in the absence of the storm, but the presence of Jesus in the storm. True peace is not going to be, okay, God, once you get rid of this storm, then I'll be okay. No, Jesus says we can walk through our everyday life all the time and we can always be at peace, even if there's a storm. When we're going through the storm, we want answers. And what God is constantly bringing us back to is, I want your heart. When we're going through the storm, we want resolution. Please, God, bring a resolution here. And God says, no, what I want is a relationship. I want to meet you there. I'm near to you. When we're going through the storm, we just wanted to stop, but God wants us to trust. I think about in Luke's gospel later on when Jesus is with Mary and Martha at their house. Martha is hosting, and Mary and Martha are sisters, and Martha's hosting Jesus at her house. There's probably a big dinner party, and so she's having to do everything, and she's upset because Mary's with Jesus. And she goes to Jesus, and she's like, hey, can you do something about my sister? And Jesus answers back, Martha, Martha, you're concerned about many things, but there's only one important thing. And what he's saying is, hey, Martha, what you need to worry about is me. Be like your sister, in fact. Like when Mary has set everything down just because I'm there, like that's the kind of relationship I desire with you. Again, that flies in the face of me when I'm in the storm and I'm in the middle of the boat. I want to take control. I want something to happen. I want to manufacture something. And Jesus is like, hey, just put it all down. Come rest in me. I'm near. Jesus was right by his disciples in the boat. And they're waking him up and they're saying, Jesus, you don't know what's happening here. And when Jesus says, where is your faith? I think the reason he asks them, where is your faith, is because he's saying to them, you think I don't know what's going on. There's times in our life where we're going to feel like, hey, is God asleep right now? What's the deal? Does he really know what's happening? And what this story shows us is that Jesus, even when he's asleep, he's got complete command. Even when he's asleep, he's like, hey, I want you guys to know, I don't want you to be unaware that I'm fully aware. Even as I sleep, I've got this. Psalm 32:10 is a verse that I've gone back to quite a bit this year. It says that many are the woes of the wicked, but the unfailing love of God, or the steadfast love of God, surrounds those who trust in him. Those who trust in him could be surrounded, what this verse is telling us is those who trust in him could be surrounded by a storm, and yet that storm not touch them at all because they are completely surrounded by the love of God. The Lord's steadfast, unfailing love surrounds those who trust in him. Okay, so how's that possible? How can we believe that? Yeah, okay, again, come on. How is it that we can truly buy into the fact that God's love, it surrounds us like that if we trust in him? And here's how. The gospel story goes on to tell all of Jesus' life, right? And what we see happen for Jesus is, in this story, he calms the storm. But in a further story down the road, he goes into the storm, right? He goes to the cross, and in the cross, he's swallowed up by the waves. He goes into the storm, and in this storm, he stays in the storm, and he gets swallowed up by the storm. And in this storm, he dies the death of punishment, one that we deserve. And the Bible tells us that we're separated from God, that sin has separated us, and except from what Jesus does on our behalf to bring us to himself, to bring relationship back to us between us and God, is that he enters into the storm. He enters into the storm of the cross. He dies on the cross, but he comes out on the other side. Right? Isn't that beautiful? That Jesus, although he's swallowed up by the storm, it does not last. And he comes out on the other side, he comes alive, and he invites us into that kind of life. And he says, look, you can trust me. I've been in the storm. I can bring you out of the storm, or I'll be with you in the storm. That Jesus is near. I want to take us back to, just to close, I want to take us back to Philippians 3 again. I went back to this verse again this week, and I was looking at it. It's verse 3, and it's like, man, this is what our life needs to look like. Okay, how do we do this in our everyday life? When the storm's coming and we need to trust the Lord, what does that look like? And Philippians 3:3 really gives us a working definition of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. It says that we are the circumcision. We worship by the Spirit of God, and we glory in Christ Jesus, and we put no confidence in the flesh. We glory in Christ Jesus, and we put no confidence in the flesh. Those two things define who we are. To glory in Jesus and put no confidence in the flesh. One commentator said it like this, that the essence of the matter, meaning to glory in Christ, what does that mean? He says the essence of the matter is so to value Jesus Christ and so to long for the smile of his approval that nothing else matters. He is all our joy. That's what it means to glory in Christ. And so in our lives, when we encounter storms, when we're working through our day and it just gets hard all of a sudden and we're in this situation we don't like and it's pressing in on us, we're to glory in Jesus. Man, only thing that matters ultimately in my life is Jesus and the things that he brings me to and the things that he walks me into and all the things that Jesus does there. That's what matters. To glory in Jesus. And put no confidence in our flesh. For us to say, there is no way in which I think I'm enough. There's no way in which I think I can be the Savior here. It's Jesus. Always Jesus. And so I want to invite you into that life, to embrace that kind of life, for us to be the kind of people where we glory in Jesus and we put no confidence in the flesh. That's how you survive the storm.